Okay, Carrie, we're live.
You're right, Carrie. I agree with you on the hunting deal.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for your patience. I think we are back up. Dion, I got a thumbs up. Okay, great. All right, we lost the feed. For those of you who might not be using your Wi-Fi, you could maybe turn that off. Thank you for that. Okay, so I think we are, as I recall, the question essentially was additive or inclusive of veterinary expenses. So I am sort of looking for a sort of a recommendation, a sort of where are we from anyone that might want to suggest one. If not, I will. Commissioner Vardy? I will. I just want to get a sense of where we are on this additive or inclusive before we go there. Commissioner Phillips?
I like the additive. I think it's scary if you spend $14,000 and then lose the animal and you're given $100 or $1,000 for your animal. I have the same issue though with where it's now it's $30,000 an animal. So where is that coming from?
We don't have an answer for that. It will come from somewhere. That's what the vote said. It will come from somewhere. Period. Our commitment is to make sure that this plan happens. That was also in statute. So we just need to have faith and understanding that that will be determined. Due to Commissioner Touchton's point, is there a limit on this? I heard 30,000. That would be additive. And that is the worst case scenario we would hope and assume, and very rare, that you would have an animal that would run a vet bill to $14,999 and then lose that animal. And then that fair market value could be up to the cap that we just agreed to a little bit ago. So if this group can agree to an additive not to exceed 15,000, which is probably a very rare exception, just checking nods. Generally, can we take a, okay, so I'm gonna go back to the questions and ask for your answers on this. So the preamble is if a producer incurs vet expenses due to wolf depredation, those expenses count towards the per head limit under the draft plan. So I think what we're all saying, if it's additive, is a no. If it's not additive, it's additive, not inclusive. So let me say it again, sorry. Expenses count towards the per head limit under the draft plan. Okay, we have all reds on that. So it is not inclusive. It is, I believe, additive. So should the expenses count towards the per head limit for livestock? So I think that was clear. Towards, that is inclusive. I just want to be clear on all this. I'm sorry, I'm asking you to vote again. Same concept. Okay, it is not inclusive. And should the expenses count towards the per head limit for guard and herding animals? Okay, I'm going to do one final question. It's a little off. Same question. Should expenses count towards the per head limit for guard and herding animals? And then the final question is, since this is now additive, that's what I think I hear everybody saying, the limit for the combination of vet expenses and the fair market value of that animal does not exceed $30,000. Okay, all greens, one yellow. You got what you need? Commissioner Haskett.
So I have a question about dogs, working dogs, guard dogs. What about dogs like APHIS uses to protect sheep and stuff when they're actually working bears, lions, things like that. Where do they fit in this picture? And can we include them? Because they're hound dogs usually, they're not stock dogs.
It's a really good question. Thank you for that, Commissioner Haskett. I would defer to council on that one. Jake, any thoughts on that?
So we're starting to talk about those sorts of regulatory definitions, and, you know, under what we've sort of sketched out, a herding dog is a dog whose primary purpose is herding livestock. A guard dog is a dog whose primary purpose is attempting to guard livestock from predators. So I don't think what you described kind of falls into either one of those buckets.
Can we add them?
I think so. I mean, I think 114 is kind of the floor, and you have the ability to add to it.
Okay. I'd like to look at that.
Do you want to explain that again, just so I can get kind of general sense of if we want to put that on the list for February 22nd? Go ahead, Marie.
So APHIS uses hound dogs to protect like sheep, and they use them for trailing bears, lions, things like that. Those are actually working dogs, guard dogs. If I read this correctly, we're excluding them, but I don't think they should be excluded.
Commissioner Lecca and Commissioner Touchton.
Who's owning these dogs? Are these like federally owned dogs? They're personal property.
Yes.
So is that the clarification, if and when they are personal property in these circumstances, they are added to this list?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think
Luke?
if I could just add one thing here, I think we are straying a little bit in the conversation from guard or herding animals, and we're getting towards that gray area where the pets topic could come up. So my question is, are you wanting to pay for pets too that are killed or injured by wolves? Because this is starting to get a little gray.
Really, it just now? Corey, would you like to enlighten us?
Madam Chair, thank you. Corey Chick, Southwest Region Manager. I think to answer your question, it depends how the dogs are used. So in other words, if we had a depredation event and that landowner had those dogs out tracking that animal or something like that, then those would be covered.
Okay, so maybe it's clearer than we thought. Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When we follow up on this, well, I have two things. One is, if it's an APHIS project and they've hired a contractor, and the contractor's dogs are injured or killed, I'd like us to explore whether that's APHIS is on the hook for that, you know, to make their contractor whole. If, you know, whether or not, if they're employing someone, if they're responsible for their employees, you know, animals. And then I hear your concerns on pets. I think that's getting far afield of what the ballot initiative told us to do.
Thank you, Commissioner Touchton. Sorry, Madam Chair. I would say if they're working under our authority, again, they would be covered. If they're working under their own, they would not. But if they're working under CPW's authority to track that animal under a depredation situation, then yes, again, they would be covered under that situation. I was talking about APHIS, sorry. The question was, and maybe I don't have your question right, if we contract APHIS under a depredation situation and those dogs were injured, then those would be working dogs under this situation and they would be covered. If they're working under their own contracts, whether that would be for coyotes or raccoons or anything like that, that would be totally separate and they would not be covered under that.
Commissioner May.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually don't like where we're going with this. I think that we're straying away from the losses to livestock producers. And in the examples given, if somebody is contracted in a depredation event and they set a band of hounds out after what's potentially a pack of wolves, or what they don't know what it is, or if CPW hires somebody, hires a hound master to send something out to track wolves, well, there's a pretty big chance that those hounds are going to encounter that pack of wolves and probably be killed. And I don't think that's something that we should be, number one, encouraging. I don't think that's the way, I haven't heard of this before, going through this process to be a conflict management. So I don't think we should encourage that activity. I think when we're talking about losses to livestock producers, we're talking about guard dogs they have on their property to guard their animals. We're talking about herding dogs they have to in their daily operations of animals. And as far as bringing contractors in with dogs that are going to track animals, I think that at some point, whether that's APHIS or somebody else, they're doing that at their own peril. So I, for one, am not in favor of including them in the same realm as we are doing with guard and herding dogs that belong to the livestock producers.
Okay, I might suggest so that we can move this on, we put this item in the parking lot for a future plan, once we understand a little bit better about this. There were other aspects, and we heard a lot of testimony from outfitters and others, and whether we like it or not the purview of 114 at this point, and very important for us to potentially consider down the line. So we will have a parking lot of items that's probably a to be considered last chapter of the plan for the future as we continue to understand the results of the plan and the reintroduction process. Thank you for putting that on the radar, Commissioner Haskett. Okay, I think we have one item left, if I'm not mistaken, and that is number 3 under Chapter 6. And rather than me try to explain this, I'm going to turn this back over to the team to try to do this fairly quickly and simply, if that's possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So number 3, question number 3 is the draft wolf plan enables producers to seek compensation for missing sheep and calves based on either a 5-to-1 ratio or a 7-to-1 ratio. 5 or 7 being the number of missing animals that could be claimed, and the 1 being the confirmed depredation. That's on the page 64 of the wolf plan. Also, any livestock owner claiming eligibility for the 7-to-1 ratio, which I mentioned previously, will bear the burden of proving that conflict minimization techniques are being implemented. So the question to you all is, in regards to the compensation ratio, the 2-tiered approach based on conflict minimization technique implementation, do you support conditioning compensation at the 7-to-1 ratio on the use of conflict minimization techniques? And just briefly, this was important to the SAG. This was a recommendation that a 2-tier ratio be implemented, but that conflict minimization techniques are not required for compensation eligibility overall, big picture, but incentivized through this ratio.
Okay, Commissioner Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Luke. I do like the idea of the stepped and the incentivizing for non-lethal. The one part of this that I don't like, and I don't know if we'll get to it, but I've brought it up before, is just adding the yearling cattle to that, calves, yearlings, and sheep.
And that's coming up next, yeah. Commissioner Tutchin and then Commissioner Vardy.
Just a quick question, because I found, well, there's animals that are lost and then sometimes they're found. What will we do if a missing animal turns up? You know, like I've had it happen, they're actually in with the neighbor's herd or something like that. Do we reevaluate it if the missing animals turn out to be alive somewhere?
Thank you for that great question, Commissioner Tutchin. So it's written into the plan, and not to this extent, but any livestock claimed as missing cannot exceed the maximum documented number of livestock missing. So they have to provide documentation that livestock are missing and not missing and then found, if that makes sense. So there has to be documentation to support that the animals are missing, or being claimed as missing. And that's mentioned in the plan frequently under missing livestock.
Commissioner Vardy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I love the idea that we're doing this ratio in the first place. I think this is fantastic. I'm also very supportive of the tiered ratio and increasing compensation when conflict minimization techniques are employed. I think anything that we can do to encourage that is good. I'm not sure if my hesitation falls in this or a different area, and it's really with some of the conditions around demonstrating some of the evidence around the livestock numbers and potential losses, something that Commissioner Phillips brought up for those ranchers that are earlier in their establishment. If we can find a way to make sure that we're not further contributing to attrition of startup farmers and ranchers. The statistics are grim as they are for attrition of people in their early stage, and I don't want to contribute to that further. So I'm not sure if it's connected to this or another point, but I do have reservation around approving the statute until that part is resolved. Thank you.
Go ahead, Luke. I'm not sure we're going to answer that today, but we can sort of
Yeah, and
put it in the
I
mix.
appreciate you bringing that up. Thank you, Madam Chair, and yeah, we can talk about that at another time. But yeah, I mean, this question is specifically, should a two-tiered ratio be implemented based on the use and implementation of conflict minimization techniques is what we're trying to figure out. I think that's the biggest issue of all right now for this question.
Okay. Okay, we're going to call a question on this one. Number 3, I'm just going to skip to the end. Do you support conditioning compensation at the 7-to-1 ratio on the use of conflict minimization techniques? And that is unanimous. So we'll move on to the next item, which is missing yearlings. And maybe both of these, just overview them, and then we'll come back to them, whichever of you would like to do that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So missing yearlings, this has been mentioned several times over the previous several commission meetings. Currently, right now, it's not included in the draft compensation plan. And I'll get to the reason of why. And then the second point here is vaccinations under the itemized production losses option. So I'll just start with the missing yearling piece, and then I'll move to the vaccination piece. So under missing yearlings, the wolf plan, the draft wolf plan proposes to compensate producers for missing calves and sheep. So just missing calves and sheep after a confirmed depredation to cattle or sheep has occurred. And that opens the door to either option 1, the compensation ratio option, or option 2, the itemized production losses option. And my question is, with that background information, should such compensation be expanded to include missing yearlings, meaning domestic cattle between 12 and 24 months? And this has recently come up in Wyoming. Wyoming just approved providing a compensation ratio for missing yearlings. There's not a lot of good science, not nearly as much as the science that we evaluated through a CPW scientific literature review. So we don't have that level of support through that science, that best available science, to support a yearling providing compensation for missing yearlings like we do for compensation for missing calves and sheep. And that's why we didn't include that in this draft plan. But that being said, as more research becomes available, maybe in Colorado, maybe elsewhere, that we can depend upon, we can always come back to this and include missing yearlings at a later time if we're basing this plan on the best available science. So I just wanted to include that too.
And I'll just clarify a little bit. Sorry, this is Corey Chick, Southwest Region Manager. We will pay for yearlings that are found. This specifically relates to the multiplier. There's no science that would give us what that multiplier would or should be. So we'll still pay for those found, and then over time, if we need to readdress that, we will.
Mr. Haskett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the confusion was it wasn't listed, so I think if you were to add it, other livestock and add them in there, it would clarify things. Because reading it originally, it's like you excluded yearling completely. I think that would be a way to help.
And just to clarify, so add language under the base compensation or under the ratio?
Under the base, so
Okay.
when I read it, it says, missing livestock claim for compensation ratio must be sheep or calves. And then it says other livestock, herding or guard animals do not qualify, but I think it would be nice if it did actually say calves, because it seems like you're excluding them.
I see.
I
Thank
think
you.
maybe was my interpretation, but that's where I think it originally came from. So, and while I'm here, I might as well just say my other two parts. I think the vaccination record should be optional, and I also think that on page 55, where it says production records and vet records, I think vet records are going to be really hard for people in this part of the country. Large animal vets are really hard to come by. There are other ways for them to produce those records, and I think we need to look at that.
Okay, so we're going to go back to the yearling item first, and then we'll come to this. Commissioner Touchton?
Well, I'll limit myself to the yearling item then. Is part of the rationale, or maybe you described it as science, but just that a dead yearling is more findable than, just because of the size of the carcass, that we would anticipate those to be found and compensated directly, where with calves and sheep, the carcass could almost entirely disappear, and we wouldn't anticipate that those things just go missing. Is I interpreting it correctly?
That's accurate, Commissioner Touchton. So yearlings have, through the various scientific studies that were reviewed by CPW, they have a better chance of being found in open range settings where topography and vegetation could make it difficult to find carcasses. Rather than sheep and calves, they're smaller animals, so they're more able to be consumed quicker and not be able to be confirmed, or being drug off and not be able to be found.
Okay, so with the clarity, kind of Commissioner Phillips, with the clarity that yearlings are included in base, does that satisfy the concerns on this item? Commissioner Phillips?
Sorry, and I might be alone in this, but when you turn yearlings out at the beginning of the season, they're 650 pounds. When you wean a calf at the end of the season, it's 550 pounds ballpark. That's a lot closer number than a 1,200-pound cow. So from personal experience, it's easy to lose a yearling animal, a small yearling or a mid-sized yearling in rough terrain. So it's not scientific, I guess. It's my personal practical experience. So that's the part I'm struggling with.
Do you have a recommendation for this group to consider?
My recommendation would be add the yearlings to the compensation ratio.
Which is the question, essentially. Other comments before we take a pulse check on this? Corey, go ahead.
Can I ask what compensation rate you would be recommending? And that's why it was not added, is because we don't, I think the closest that anyone has come is like 1.2 to 1.7 per missing. So, and again, there's not necessarily a scientific paper to back that at this time, but that's kind of what we're needing. Or you want it to be under the 5, 7, or its own number?
I guess I would just say under the 5.7, and hopefully we don't get up to the 5.7, because hopefully they are easier to find. But if you turn out a bunch of lightweight yearlings at the beginning of the season and lose a pile of them, to me, it's no different than calves. So I would propose just to insert yearlings into what's existing under the 5.7.
Okay, so that is a straw man. Other comments? Disagreements, agreements, general thinking? Again, one Commissioner, Commissioner Adams.
I defer to, thank you, Commissioner Phillips.
That guy down there. Okay, well, let's test that one then. So the question is, do we support including yearlings in the conditioning compensation at the 7-to-1 ratio on the use of conflict minimization techniques? Essentially, we're adding that. Is that correct? Counselor? Make sure that we're getting it right.
The missing yearlings question?
Yes.
Should such compensation be expanded to include missing yearlings?
Well, we're adding it actually to not just the base, but the ratio as well.
It's already in the base, that's,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. To Commissioner Haskett's point, that might not be clear in the language. So we are adding it to the ratio formula. Okay, is that clear to everyone? So do you support adding yearlings to the ratio calculation? Okay, all greens, a couple yellows, so we've got that one resolved. And then the vaccination item. Any other comments on the vaccination question? Counselor Matter.
So Luke can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the missing yearling question pertains not only to ratio, but itemized. So the straw poll just would add, that we just took, would have added yearlings to ratio claims, but missing calves and sheep are paid under the itemized claims also, but not on a ratio. So the additional question, I think, is should the treatment you just gave yearlings be expanded to the itemized claim also?
Commissioner Haskett.
Can I just make a suggestion that maybe we look at what the SAG group recommended for yearlings and what Wyoming does and bring that back to us?
Thank you, Commissioner Haskett. So Wyoming recently adopted a 1.25, 1.25. So for every confirmed yearling confirmed as depredated by wolves, there could in theory be 1.25 yearlings missing. And that number, 1.25, is the fair market value of the animal in Wyoming. Does that help?
What did the SAG group recommend?
Down here, there we go. So the SAG group recommended that yearlings be included, but we didn't have that best available science like we did for missing sheep and calves, so that's why we didn't include that. But the SAG did recommend that to be included.
Commissioner May. So is this an item, Councilor Matter, that we want to bring back on the 22nd? Or do we want to, because it sounds like we don't know what we don't know yet.
I think you got the clarity from Commissioner Phillips with respect to the ratio questions. And the question as phrased in your notes would have extended to both types of claims. It was asked in a more narrow fashion, but I think the intent is to apply yearlings to both itemized claims and ratio claims.
I think
That's my takeaway.
I think that's true. Do we need to vote on that again? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads. Okay. Okay, can we now move to the vaccination item? Thank you. Any other comments on this item? Commissioner Haskett mentioned her comments. Other comments, questions on vaccination? Commissioner Blanca.
What was a reasoning for the vaccination, needing the vaccination status?
Yes, thank you for that, Commissioner. So the reasoning for the vaccination status required for the itemized production losses was providing documentation that strengthens the claim that the missing animals were a result of predation, not other causes. So it's actually good for CPW, but it's also good for the claimant because it strengthens that claim by providing that documentation and excluding other causes of death that would cause that animal to go missing.
Commissioner Bailey, and I'd also look at some of our producers to maybe comment additionally on the realities of vet services in our state right now. That'd be helpful to understand. Commissioner Bailey?
Yeah, just seconding that point. The other question is, we've asked it before, how is this done? How are vaccines treated for other game damage claims?
And the short answer is that we don't require vaccine documentation for other game damage claims in Chapter 17 for big game damage.
Commissioner Touchton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, it's sort of two questions. One is on just itemized production losses generally. I'd like to hear more about how we exclude all the other factors in addition to disease, which you mentioned, but, you know, drought, weather, all sorts of things can cause lower weights. And I don't know how we're going to isolate it was wolves that are responsible versus all the other things that could cause a down year in your production. And then if we don't use vaccination records, what's the alternative? What other records exist that would give us the same information?
Thank you for that. Two great questions. What other records exist? I think if we had some other options, we would have included them, but we've been really thinking this over for a while now, and without requiring a third party who is unbiased to help provide documentation to strengthen a claim, I really don't have a good answer for that at this time. Open to your thoughts as a commission on that, but I wanted to provide that. And then remind me of your first question, if you don't mind.
That was just how, in addition to disease, which could result in a missing animal, but I'm thinking more about like the loss of weight gains or the conception rates. There's so many things that could cause that. How will we isolate or have some certainty that wolves are actually responsible for those losses?
Thank you for that, Commissioner Touchton. And that's really the question, is that knowing that there's other sources of deaths for and indirect costs associated with the itemized production losses, I think providing as much documentation as possible gets us to that area where we can more comfortably say that, you know, that these losses are caused by wolves and not attributed to other predators, disease, drought, any other factors. So, and that's part of the reason why extra documentation is required under this, is to exclude any other factors other than wolf-caused itemized production losses.
So as a possible compromise straw man on this, similar to other game damage claims, is this something that could be incentivized? In other words, your game damage claim is enhanced by virtue of veterinarian records. And if you are someone that simply cannot do that, or there's not a big animal vet available or whatever, I just am wondering if it, rather than it may be made a requirement, it is a strong encouragement. It is strongly recommended. It is, you know, to the extent it could be supported by CPW, whatever. Just a question.
Thanks again, Madam Chair. That's actually the language we've been thinking of anticipating this question, is that it would necessarily not be mandatory, but looked favored upon as in helping to confirm those cases in those.
That's something we can test with the group. Sorry, Commissioner May.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I struggle with this issue because I don't think there's probably a producer that does not vaccinate. I mean, it's part of good animal husbandry. And as far as requiring veterinary records, I doubt that many people buy their vaccines and have veterinarians administer them. I mean, I guess I see where we're going with this, but I contend there's not somebody out there running cattle, sheep, or whatever that isn't already under a strict vaccine protocol. It's just part of the business.
So perhaps that's simply an affidavit to that effect, as we would ask producers to provide other, essentially testifying to their own operations. Seeing some nods. Corey?
Sure, it could, I mean, it could be that, it could be as simple as just those receipts of the vaccine itself. That's more of what we're getting at, is just anything that we can get that helps, it doesn't put our folks in a controversial situation of making that decision of yes or no. And the more we build gets back to Commissioner Haskett's favorite term, the preponderance of evidence. And just to be able to lean that way in the producers. We're trying to get all the tools out there that we could look at. So, I mean, this is part educational as well, in being in this process, that these are all the things that you can do to help us lean your way in those situations that deserve to be so.
I agree with that, Corey. I think we have to document, or we have to incentivize people to document what they're already doing to do that. And this is just one means of us. For example, we're 75 miles from a vet. I mean, we have a couple vets closer, but they don't do large animal work. So 75 miles, it's not feasible to have that veterinary or that somebody from that clinic. First of all, you couldn't get them to come do your vaccines. But if you buy your vaccine and have proof of that, I think that itself should be enough evidence that you have administered that vaccine to your animals.
Corey, anything else?
Not on this topic. I needed one other point of clarification.
No way. Okay, if we can sort of test this item. Sorry, chair's prerogative. So I think what we're saying is that we are not supporting a requirement. We are supporting documentation, testimonial, evidence of vaccination status. However worded, that will come back to us in a more flexible, encouraged, incentivized way. Did I get that? Commissioner Haskett, would you like to vote? Okay. All right, I think we can move on from that. So Corey, I think you have one more item.
One point of clarification with Commissioner Haskett's question on what the SAG wanted and what other states provide. Is the direction from the commission to still place yearlings into the 5 and 7 or the 1.25?
I don't think we actually answered it. I think that it is, we wanted to include it in a ratio. I don't know that we actually determined that it's the same calculation. Do we want that to come back to us with some better clarity? Can we ask for staff to come back? So yearlings would be included, and perhaps a recommendation on what that might be, at least in the initial phase of this, because we'll have more data as we go along. Commissioner Touchton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And when you come back, I'd like a spread as well. Like, so we have 5 and 7. If, 5 if you didn't do non-lethal preventative, 7 if you did. When Corey spoke earlier, he said the numbers were at like 1.2 to 1.7. And I would like to see, 1.2 if you didn't use preventative, 1.7 if you did, or whatever those numbers you want to bring back. But I like that incentivizing.
Yeah, we can set that up as a 2-tiered ratio, similar to sheep and calves.
Okay, generally, just since that was one commissioner, generally nods around. Okay, getting some other folks saying yes. Okay. Commissioner Haskett, Commissioner May, Commissioner Haskett.
I have one question that I don't think we answered, maybe we did, but on the baseline conception rates, I brought up the vet records because it says and vet records, but in our area, we don't have a vet that will come out. The livestock owners do this themselves, so I'd like to see that change to just their production records, as it was mentioned in testimony. People do that.
Yeah, I think that's what we voted on. That there's some flexibility on that. At least that's my recollection. Commissioner May, do you still have a comment? Okay, so we've clarified that. Commissioner Phillips?
Yeah, just clarify, because I understood it was just the vaccination records. I thought the preg checking was separate.
My understanding is it was, if you have vet records, that's an additive. Again, we will describe this in a way that's incentives, that provides some options of what those records are. Okay, right? And we'll see that again, that language again. Counselor Matter.
I hate to disagree with you, but I think the discussion was limited to vaccination previously and not pregnancy checks. And I'm not sure if Luke disagrees, but I do view them as different, and I know that's important to the division, so.
Okay, so then we want to formally, if I understand what you're saying, formally are we requiring veterinarian records? That wasn't one of our questions, but that's what you want clarity on?
That was not one of the written questions, but it certainly is a recurring theme.
Okay, so Luke, would you like to rephrase that so that we know what you need from us?
Of course, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to. The question is, should livestock owners be required to submit vet records demonstrating pregnancy checks? Does that categorize that well?
I'm getting a nod from Jake on this. This is also something we can bring back on the 22nd if we're not ready to do this today. It seems to me that we've opened up another appropriate question, but wasn't one of the questions that we had agreed to deliberate today. May I recommend that we bring this back on the 22nd? I'm getting a thumbs up from the lawyer, so I'm going to think that's okay. Okay. We're all getting a little punchy. Thanks for hanging in there. So a couple of just housekeeping items. I think we've completed this. Thank you very much for a fairly simplified but pretty important way of giving our team an opportunity to come back with some additional clarity on the wording. And I think you probably have in your parking lot a few other items. I heard carcass management, particularly today, and there were some others that hopefully you have noted that we can bring back either in read when we have the next round of answers to commissioner comments or questions, just so we can move a few of those forward as well. Okay, great. Commissioner Bailey.
Sorry, I'm definitely not necessarily processing all of the things that I might want to go in the parking lot. So can we communicate that via email to agency staff? Okay.
Yes, you can. The only nuance to that is it's only you. We've tried to make the test of those today that it's not just one commissioner. So if there is something specific you want to see, let's just put it out there now so that we can get some nods of heads and determine whether it's just you or it's a general tenor of the group. Is there anything that's at the top of the list, low-hanging fruit?
I was actually thinking about something that Commissioner Adams brought up during lunch, but again, I can't process anything else right now at this point in the day. So apologies.
Okay, well, we need to do this in public. So perhaps for our February 16 meeting, even though that's mostly public comment, if there are a couple of these items that you feel strongly about that you could direct those to staff, we could at least have a quick opportunity to vet those and make sure that we're on the right track with the balance of the commission. Is that a complete audible while we're sitting here? Is that okay? Okay. Reed? I just got myself in trouble.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I was finding my notes as what I had in the parking lot.
Okay.
So, yeah, what do you need from me, I guess?
Nothing. Nothing. As kids say. I was listening, but would you please say that again? Okay. No, I think what we'll do is make sure that we have some understanding of the things that are in the parking lot. And perhaps those go in the chair notes for February 16, just to make sure that we've captured those. And if there's anything else you feel strongly about, please direct those to Reed. Between now and then, they need to come back to this full group and not be one individual commissioner. So let's make sure that we're moving those forward for February 22nd in a group, in some form of a group process or discussion. Fair enough? Okay, a couple other quick housekeeping items, and then I am going to offer the final word to Executive Director Gibbs. February 16th is a virtual meeting, so we certainly encourage those of you who are interested and anyone that could not join us in person to join us virtually. And I might ask that the gentleman give Executive Director Gibbs room up at the front so he can see everyone. And then February 22nd, we will not be at the Hunter Education Building at CPW. We will more than likely be at the Adams County Fairgrounds. It will accommodate a larger group. We will have the ability to have people park and just have better access. So we will update the location of that Front Range meeting on February 22nd, and more than likely it will be at the Adams County Fairgrounds and not at 6060 Broadway. So we'll make sure and make sure that that's clear. And then our March meeting is our regular meeting in Aurora, where we will continue these discussions, and we will also take on other items or regular items on the agenda, and we will, as long as our timeline continues to proceed, we will interview an executive session finalist for the CPW director. So that is scheduled for our March meeting. So just so you have that little item on your radar as well. Okay. Thank you for running long. This seemed really important. Hopefully roads are good, weather's good. We'll get you on the road here in a moment. And the only thing that is separating you from getting home is Executive Director Gibbs. So go ahead, Dan.
I'll be really quick. But thank you so much. And Madam Chair / President of CMC, thank you so much. Let's give Carrie and all CMC a round of applause. Really, yeah, thank you. Really wonderful to be in this facility. And what a great day. It's been a very productive day and very meaningful to really hear from everyone. It was awesome to hear from the SAG members that participated. So thank you so much for the SAG members and the TWIG members. You did tremendous work, and we really appreciate all of your recommendations. I want to thank you all here for participating. The time you took away from your jobs today, as well as the students, Peyton and Tanner, thanks for missing school to be here. That was very meaningful to hear from everyone. I have many pages of notes, but just want to make sure you all know the time that you spend here and let all the commissioners know your thoughts is meaningful. It's very important, and it's the right time right now because, as you all know, we're deliberating, we're talking about what you like, what you don't, and hearing from you right now is extremely important. If you felt like, your 2 minutes or 3 minutes was not enough time, there's a lot of opportunities to still weigh in, send emails, let Parks and Wildlife know what your thoughts are. Also, key takeaways from me that I want to make sure you know that I'm going to be working on and continuing to working on. Everyone knows the importance of the 10J. We are working at the highest levels of state and federal government to make sure that we're going to bring that to Colorado to give the tools and resources that CPW needs, as well as we've had discussions on funding too. And I know that's very challenging as well to really look at, what are the long-term funding needs for Parks and Wildlife. So I'll be enlisting Commissioner Greenberg to help with that as we navigate the state capitol and all the pieces that need to be in play for that. You as CPW commissioners, thank you so much. You just are so amazing. I love the paddle board today. It was really great to see kind of what everyone's thinking. And then last but not least, I want to thank Reed, Eric, Luke, Justin, Corey, your whole team, Heather. Really appreciate everyone from CPW. So let's give them a round of applause because they have really the hardest job in front of us, and they're collaborative and they're really doing such amazing work. So that's it. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
And to Laura and our OIT team for broadcasting us. So thank you very much. See you next week.